Last but certainly not least, it is the NFC West. If you've missed your favorite team, go back on the channel and check it out. This would mark and finalize us going through every single team's offseason and predicting their record going into 2024. And again, Amir, I don't know, there's not too many divisions that are better to finish off on than the NFC West. A lot of optimism, a lot of questions, but without further ado, let's get into it. Amir, of course you missed last week, but you're back this week. You've been drowning over there on your socials, of course. Welcome back to the show, man. How you doing?
Doing good, man. I'm happy to be back. I was kind of upset I didn't make it last week, because, I personally thought, it would have been interesting to talk about the AFC West, but I'm back.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a fun time to talk about Mahomes. But Amir, do you want to throw out your socials there if you want? If you can, if not, you don't have to. But we can get right into San Fran if you don't.
I mean, honestly, hey, I will. I mean, since you're offering, my Instagram is Amir, Amir, Stewart with two T's in the end, Stewart.
Yeah, not only it's anywhere from fashion to the field. It's a bit of everything over there. Of course, his sense of fashion, something I'll never have. Regardless, we're starting off here with the San Francisco 49ers, man. And this is a team that is your reigning NFC champions. They were an overtime period away from winning the Super Bowl just this past season. This is a team that has one of the most talented rosters, and they've been so close these last couple years. Could this be the year? That's the biggest question. But going into the offseason, they had little to no cap space, of course, and now there's a lot of questions. Do we trade Brandon Ayuk? Does he want out? Of course, he's hinting he wants to play with his former college quarterback at Arizona State, now with the Commanders and Jaden Daniels. That would be interesting. But they went into the offseason. They lost a guy in Eric Armstead that has only been there for, let's say, 5 or so years, but it feels like he's been there for a decade. They lost Chase Young, who they only had for about a year, and Javon Kinlaw, of course, a true game disruptor up front. They went out in this draft, and with the 31st pick in the first round, we thought it was Max Melton. Of course, all the reports and beat writers, they said Max Melton out of Rutgers, the cornerback, was going to San Fran, which we all thought was going to help out their secondary. But they threw a curveball in the first round. They ended up drafting Ricky Pearsall. I'm a Gators fan. I love to see it, and I think he's the perfect fit for this Kyle Shanahan offense. He's a tremendous route runner, great hands, of course, sneaky athleticism, no hidden jokes behind that one. But, I mean, this is a guy that's going to fit perfectly next to Debo and Brandon Ayuk. And I don't know how you're going to guard these receivers because you can't double team one because that leaves another one open. And you can't really put these guys in single coverage because all three of them are great in their own perspective. Ricky Pearsall, exciting to see what he can do in his first season. They added Leonard Floyd to fill the void of some of this defensive line depth that they lost. They added Yader Gross-Matos, of course, a Nittany Lion. I'll never forget that, even though he's not a great player, but with a name like that, you always know what college he went to. And then they extended Christian McCaffrey, paying him like a receiver at the running back position. Amir, I'll give you the floor here. You're a big fan of the quarterback here. Of course, a little bit of a bigger fan than me. We've had arguments about Brock Purdy. But your thoughts about San Francisco? Can this be the year they get over the top?
Personally, I would say, for them to have, little cap space, this offseason, I personally think that they won this offseason and they kind of attacked it well, especially in the draft. And, obviously, there was kind of a lot of disagreement with, fans and stuff like that about them going and grabbing a Ricky Pearsall in the first, that first round. But, personally, I'm not mad at that pick. Ricky kind of fits, their quarterback's game, which is attacking the middle of the field. And honestly, looking at him and the receivers that were left, he's probably, the safer pick because he's already polished, already ready. And so, also, they kind of have some guys, coming back from injury, the biggest one, Fargas coming back from injury. So, I think the secondary is, going to be good coming back, ready to go. And I thought they picked up, one of the most underrated players in the draft, out of Wake Forest, Malik Mustafa, the safety. Yeah. And so, I personally feel like, they did a great job of sort of, attacking, this offseason, having, very little wiggle room, and I also believe, they're probably going to bring back Ayuk, probably like, a full extension because, in my honest opinion, he definitely fully deserved it. So, going into this season, I'm not 100% sure, if this is the year. The NFC, everybody's getting better.
Yes.
Detroit got exactly like, Detroit got even better. They're coming back for revenge this year. They kind of got a taste of what it feels like to, to somewhat win. Green Bay is getting better. The Rams are getting back healthier and better. And so, this year would definitely be a lot tougher. Will it be the year? I don't know. I mean, personally, I have Detroit making it out of the NFC, but it really could be the year. If Brock Purdy hits that next drive, it really could
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, I mean, to circle back, they did a lot with what little they had. And of course, like you mentioned there, Ricky Pearsall's polished. He's ready to go from day one. As if this offense didn't have enough firepower, they go out and add a player like Ricky Pearsall. So interested to see what this offense and this team can do. But let's get into their season. I'll start off here. I'll pass it to you next. And to me, honestly, again, I think this is a team that is up there with the Browns, with the Lions, with some other teams like the Chiefs, for example, as far as one of the best rosters in the game of football going into this next season. They just need to stay healthy, put it together, and of course, get over the top. I also forgot to mention about Dre Greenlaw. Hopefully, he can come back. Of course, we remember his unfortunate injury in the Super Bowl on a non-contact play. Hopefully, he can come back on the second half of the season and be somewhat of the same player. But getting into their season, I think they can open it up with a couple wins here against the Jets and the Vikings. But I think their first loss will come on the road in week 3 against the Rams that are fully healthy, hopefully, right, with Cooper Kupp, and a team that's only gotten better on both sides of the ball, even with a big departure, which we'll talk about in a moment. After that, I think they can win 4 of the next 5. I think they can beat Kansas City in week 7, get that much needed revenge, because I think San Francisco going into that game might just have more to prove than Kansas City. They might want this meaningless regular season game more than the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think they can win that one. Some other easier games on the schedule as well. 2 divisional games in week 5 and 6. And then in week 8, of course, I talked about this a couple weeks back. I think this might be one of those Dak Prescott games where if he doesn't have an extension, he goes out there and proves I'm worth that big time money. So he gets a big win there. San Francisco goes into the bye week at 6-2. Coming out of that, they win their first 4 against 4 quality opponents. Tampa Bay, a playoff team. Green Bay, playoff team. Buffalo, playoff team. Seattle, right on the brink. And you end up sweeping the Seattle Seahawks in the division. Going after that, of course, I think this is one of those games, of course, I talked about. This might be a Caleb Williams performance. Even if the Bears come out of this season with 5-6 wins, this is going to be that performance we remember that say, we made the right selection. Caleb Williams is our guy. He's going to get a big win there against the San Francisco 49ers in San Fran. You close off the year 3-4 in that stretch against, again, quality opponents. Amir, this is definitely a tough schedule. And for this team, I have them at their ceiling, I believe, at 13-4, maybe 14-3, or 14-3 is their ceiling. I think 13-4 is their ceiling, and they have a lot of playoff caliber teams on the schedule. So for me to have them at 13-4 should tell you a lot about how much I believe in San Fran. But I'll kick it over to you.
Start the season off, I kind of have them, similar to you, coming out, first game of the year, beating, the New York Jets, kind of getting their feet wet against this tough defense. After that, have them beat Minnesota at Minnesota. And then, surprisingly losing to the Rams, in LA, playing against the Rams in LA is always going to be a tough divisional game. So I had them losing that first divisional matchup. After that, winning 3 straight games at that. After that, that Sunday game, I actually have them losing to Kansas City, and end up beating Dallas on Sunday Night Football to, go 6-2 at the bye week. And so after that bye week, I have them winning those next 2, sweeping Seattle as well, and then dropping those 2 games. It might be similar to last year how, San Fran, they rallied off 3 straight losses. People were kind of like, oh, San Fran, they're the chokers, the frauds and stuff like that. And then after that, the week 14 and 18 to have them, winning 3 straight after that, losing to Detroit, which is a very tough game. And then, that week 18 game, I kind of have, Detroit kind of clinching that 1 seed, San Fran, pretty much clinching that 2 seed no matter what. And I have them resting their stars, but also still beating Arizona on the road.
Yeah, I mean, again, Arizona is a talented team, and we'll talk about that. I think Arizona's extremely underrated. But to get back to the Niners, we talk about the importance of bye weeks here on the channel a lot. And you have them at 12-5. This is a San Francisco team that, with this tough schedule, has a bye week right in the middle of the season. I think for their schedule, it's a perfect bye week for the 49ers. Much needed bye week, middle of the season. Get ready for the home stretch. But let's talk about the Rams. The Rams, of course, they had their best player in franchise history recently retire in Aaron Donald. I don't know if there's a guy that was on the top of the mountain for so long of his shorter career when you really look at it like a guy like Aaron Donald. And that includes guys like, of course, LT, of course, Lawrence Taylor, guys like Deion Sanders, Ray Lewis, guys like that, Reggie White. I don't know if there was a guy that was as dominant as Aaron Donald was for as long as he was in his shorter career. I don't know if there was a guy as efficiently as efficient as Aaron Donald is what I'm getting at, right? This is a guy that was an all-pro from his first season on. But then this team went out there in this offseason trying to replace this Hall of Fame guy, a guy that in Aaron Donald, Amir, they might let that dude in the Hall of Fame a year early. That's how good Aaron Donald was. But they went out there, and if you want to just straight power and force on the edge of your defensive line, Jared Verse is the perfect guy for the LA Rams. You know, I've never seen a guy, as long as I've watched football and college football, rise up the ranks as fast as Jared Verse. This is a guy that was an FBS player just a year and a half ago, and then he transfers to Florida State. 1 year, dominates, and then he's a first-round pick in a year and a half span from the FBS level to the highest level of football. Crazy run by Jared Verse. Of course, he was a Florida State Seminole, dominated my Gators in that one game. But Jared Verse, happy to see how much he dominated. And then they go out there and get Brandon Fisk, his teammate, of course, there out of Florida State. Two defensive linemen from the same college. Rare you get to see that with their first two selections. They get Blake Corum in a bit of a shocker. Of course, Kyron Williams had a breakout year last year. And then my favorite safety, really DB in the class, and Cameron Kinchens out of the U, of course, is a steal of a pick in the late third or late fourth. The Rams had a great draft. Amir, honestly, they might have a top 3 draft out of all the teams in the NFL. They extended Kevin Dotson to give Stafford some help. They brought in Jonah Jackson on a bag from Detroit. They brought in Trey White and Darius Williams. And the only thing they really lost this offseason was their defensive coordinator in Raheem Morris, who went over to Atlanta. Amir, your thoughts about the Rams offseason, and why is Puka Nacua the best receiver in the NFL in your eyes?
That's crazy, but the Rams had an amazing, offseason. And, we kind of talk about how, picking out, the weakness on your team. And once Aaron Donald left, because it was last year, Aaron Donald was getting double and triple team, and the D-line was really struggling at times. And so, Aaron Donald leaves, and you go ahead and boost the D-line up even more in the defense as a whole. You bring back, two high quality corners. You go ahead and bring in Jonah Jackson to protect Stafford, from dealing with the injuries like he did last year. And you go ahead and bring in Blake Corum. I understand Blake Corum's overlooked, but Kyron's first year, in the league, he dealt with injuries. He was banged up. Even last year, he was kind of banged up. So you kind of bring in, a guy who proved that, in college, he can ball. And so you kind of the load off of him as well. And so, this team, this unit, they really did a great job of really, boosting this team up in the draft, free agency, and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting into their schedule, of course, they have the Stafford rematch, or I guess 2.0 last year. Of course, if I'm not mistaken, the Detroit Lions won that game against the Rams last year in the Stafford return to Detroit. Regardless, I think Detroit can do it again. I think Detroit, going this time to going to LA this time on Sunday Night Football in Week 1. I think the Detroit Lions are out for blood. Like you mentioned, they could potentially win the NFC. They're going to pick up their first one on the season. The Rams dropped to 0-1. Then I think the Rams rally back in a big way, getting 4 straight wins against 4 quality opponents, and don't overlook Arizona. Coming out of the bye week, you're 4-1. Of course, you're feeling good. Now, you do have an early bye week, and I'm not the biggest fan of that for the Rams, and that might come into play when we talk about playoff predictions. But as far as regular season, you come out of it feeling good. You win 2 of the next 3 against the Raiders, the Vikings, and of course, you drop a divisional matchup there to the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle. To the second half of the season, you have 4 primetime games. You lose to Miami on Monday Night Football after a tough divisional loss. So you'll lose 2 straight games, but you can bounce back here with a win against New England, lost to Philly, and you beat the New Orleans Saints. Now, here's the biggest stretch, and Amir, I think this is going to be where the season starts to catch up to the Rams, where they've had a lot of tough games, and they had that early bye week. So this is where I think it can catch up to them. You lose to 3 legitimate, depending on who you ask, Super Bowl contenders in the Buffalo Bills, San Fran, and the New York Jets. But I think you can finish it off with 2 strong wins. 11-6. I think it's not their ceiling. It's not their floor. I'd say it's right in the middle for the LA Rams. But over to you, Amir. You have them starting off the same exact way as me.
Hey, so I have to, also look to, Detroit. Detroit is an absolutely loaded team, and Detroit matches up well against them every way. And so, especially starting off in Detroit, and
Yeah,
so
it's
in that
tough.
environment, exactly. So I have Detroit winning that game. After that, having rallying off 3 straight wins, and losing that game against Green Bay before the bye week. You mentioned, I mean, an earlier bye week, in week 6. I mean, every single team, that's probably the biggest nightmare. And so, after that,
Well, before you go
you know,
on, I mean, as a Jordan Love fan, I'm liking what I'm seeing. Jordan Love's knocking off two elite NFC contenders
yeah,
in your eyes, in the Rams and the Niners. I
yeah.
digress, but go ahead.
Yeah, after that had them after that bye week, rallying off 2 straight wins, losing that first game against Seattle. After that, I have them, at home Monday Night Football against, a quality opponent against Miami, winning that, beating New England in New England. After that, losing against Philly at home and then rallying off 2 straight wins, against two, solid defenses. After that, I have them, splitting, those last 4 games, losing to San Fran, losing to the Jets back-to-back games, and then, handling business against Arizona and Seattle to finish the year up at 11-6.
Yeah, same record, but we have them going there or getting there in a little bit completely different ways. But let's talk about a team that, I might, I'm not sure how you view them, and we'll talk about it, I guess. But to me, I think this is a team that they have the tools to be a good playoff team, but I think their ceiling is a first round win, I guess. I can't see this team winning 2 rounds in the NFL playoffs. And again, that's if everything goes right for this team. But let's talk about it. They entered a new chapter here in Seattle football. Pete Carroll stepped down from the head coaching spot. He enters the front office, and this team goes out there and hires Mike Macdonald, who has been the defensive coordinator in Baltimore. Their dominant defense, and of course, almost a historic defense for stretches last season. He comes over to be the head coach, so it's a new identity here in Seattle. They re-signed Noah Fant, re-signed Leonard Williams, of course, to help up front, if I can talk. Because if you don't know, Mike Macdonald, if you watch Baltimore's defense last year, guys like Justin Madubuike, of course, broke out onto the scene because of this scheme. He likes to build a wall and likes to stop the run, force teams to throw, which is kind of counterintuitive in 2024, but it worked out for the Baltimore Ravens defense, even with a subpar secondary last season. They add Jerome Baker from the Miami Dolphins. Solid. This team needed some linebacker help next to Jordan Brooks. They lost Jamal Adams. They lost Quandre Diggs. 2 questionable decisions, but they needed, for cap space reasons, they got rid of both of them. Now, this is where that run wall comes into effect. They draft Byron Murphy II out of Texas. Of course, he's not the big, I guess, the double team guy like his running mate at college in Texas in Tavondre Sweat. But this is a guy that, like Aaron Donald, is great at using his hands. He's undersized, but he does everything else pretty well. They also brought in Christian Haynes, of course, out of Connecticut, to help up front for Geno Smith. But talking about Geno, is this the last year for him? They don't really have a quality backup behind him. Amir, your thoughts about the Seattle Seahawks in their offseason? Is this the last year for Geno Smith to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of talked about how, Seattle was kind of a team that, I kind of predicted, I predicted for them to kind of pick up, a guy like Bo Nix or Penix later in that
Yeah,
draft, but they both ended up getting drafted early, surprisingly. And so, I personally think that this year, is Geno's last year, playing in a Seahawks uniform, just for the simple fact that, I mean, they have some pieces that, they could really, make a playoff push with. And, I think, based off of last year, them falling short of that and them kind of, being disappointed, seeing DK and Tyler Lockett both, take a step back. I think they're kind of looking at this team like, okay, listen, like something has to change. And so, we got to grab a quarterback. And so, I thought overall the offseason, was pretty solid. They kind of attacked that D-line, which is a major weakness. Even though they lost Jamal Adams and Quandre, you're bringing, Mac Donald, just like you mentioned how last year in Baltimore, having a subpar secondary, they were still, doing good at making plays for their guys,
great
running man to
defense.
man. Exactly, setting pressure. The fact that you pretty much give McDonald an even better secondary, a better cornerback duo, and Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen. I think that this Seahawks defense is definitely going to be legit. But I think that this Seahawks team is going to kind of be a team that that has all the tools and the pieces on paper, but kind of falls short of that.
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be Mike McDaniel's fault. Now, I will say I don't think it's going to be Geno Smith's last year, but I think next year would be his last year. I think he's the perfect ideal bridge quarterback. And again, when we get into my schedule predictions, I this is my hope for the Seattle Seahawks. So I know the 12th man, they're going to come after me and be pretty angry. We'll have to see where you have them, and maybe you need to put me in place with the Seattle Seahawks. But I think this is a team that should not necessarily strive to tank for one of these top quarterbacks in next year's class, but they need one of these top quarterbacks to spell Geno Smith and kind of mesh these timelines where in 2 years from now, or we're not this year, but next year, at times, maybe you can throw that rookie in, whoever it is, whether it's Carson Beck, whether if it's Shador Sanders, you throw that rookie quarterback in, and he can still play, and this team can still dominate with all the young pieces they have around the quarterback position. Of course, with the talented receiving group. We didn't even mention JSN. They also have KW3, of course, Ken Walker. With this talented young defense, I just think they need the right quarterback to lead the ship, and I don't know if Geno's that guy. But with that in mind, this is my hope for the Seattle Seahawks. I still think they get off to the year on a good start. They win those 2 games. You lose quality games to the Miami Dolphins and the Detroit Lions. Then I'll say you win 2 of the next 5 games against the Giants, Rams. Maybe you pick up a divisional win there. But losing to teams like Atlanta, San Fran, Buffalo, heading into your bye week at 4-5, excuse me. So, this is not a bad start to the season if you're the Seattle Seahawks. But this is where I think it gets ugly. I have them winning 2 of the next 7 games. Really just finishing off their year rough, right? You lose to Arizona. You lose to, some teams probably you shouldn't lose to. But I think if you could finish the year at 6-11, that would put you with a top 10 pick in the draft. And that's going to give you a very good spot to grab one of these next quarterbacks coming out. And you could still, I guess, keep your team in a position where you'll be ready next year with whether it's Geno, one of these young quarterbacks. I just think for Seattle, you need to make a trade or you need to tank for one of these quarterbacks. But again, this is my hope for the Seattle Seahawks in 2024. But your thoughts, and I guess we'll see if you agree with me.
Yeah, I say Seattle was one of the tougher teams of kind of, mapping their schedule out because, I don't know, if they're going to be, great or just bad. And so, so I have them winning their first 2 games, against Denver and New England. After that week 3, I have them losing to Miami and Detroit in back-to-back games. Handling business in New York, losing to San Fran on Thursday Night Football, beating Atlanta and Atlanta, and then dropping those 2 games, 2 high-quality opponents. And after that, going into this bye week, a week 10 bye week isn't bad. You kind of finish 2 divisional games at that point, and you basically get the rest your players and stuff like that. Kind of look at the divisional standings and kind of make a push after that. And I'm just like you. I had them losing their next 2 out of 7 games here, and so I have them dropping 3 straight, losing to San Fran, Arizona, a divisional game, and then losing to the Jets. I had them beating Arizona, feeling like they kind of get back on track. And I have them, losing to Green Bay, beating Minnesota in a close game, and then, dropping those last 2 games to finish 6-11 as well.
Green Bay is 3-0 in your predictions against this division. Something we got to look out for heading over to the easiest opponent on paper in the Arizona Cardinals. Jordan Love, it sounds like a top 5 quarterback. But again, when we talk about the Seattle Seahawks, it's not that we don't think this team could potentially be, an 8-9 win football team. They definitely can. But I think this is a good year to reset. And of course, I guess retool the offense going into the future, especially when you still have young weapons around your quarterback. But talking about the Arizona Cardinals, this is year 2 under John Gannon. Year 1, not very successful. But Amir, we have to remember, whether if it was Josh Dobbs or a carousel of other subpar quarterbacks, this team didn't have their star quarterback, their franchise's face, in Kyler Murray until week 10, 11, or 12. It was late in the season, and this team already was out of playoff contention by the time Kyler Murray returned. Now, when he returned, we already talked about it last year. We said he is playing for his job, and he is going to screw this Cardinals team out of getting a guy like Caleb Williams, getting out a guy like Drake May or one of the young quarterbacks. And he did just that. He won this team 2 or 3 games down the stretch, pretty much putting them out of contention for one of those quarterbacks. But Kyler also proved that when he's healthy and when he has a little bit of help, he can put your team over the top. So this is a team that went into the draft and said, we have our quarterback. Let's get some help around him. I think they had a tremendous draft. They get, of course, Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe the most talented receiving prospect we've ever seen. Of course, his dad is a Hall of Famer. They go out there and attach this defensive line as well. I can't remember the name of the edge that they lost, but they lost their leading sack guy from last season. They go out there and get Darius Robinson out of Mizzou. Has a lot of potential. He just needs to be untapped. They go out there and help the secondary, getting Max Melton, of course, out of the second round. And they also get my favorite running back prospect in the class, in Trey Benson, of course, out of Florida State, a guy that is just ready from day one. And we'll talk about it. Of course, they added Sean Murphy-Bunting, Jonah Williams, who is subpar, and also extended Chris Barnes. This is an offense under John Gannon that we saw that second half of last year when Kyler returned. It was a run first, let the play action open up the pass later in the game. That is, John Gannon comes out of this Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay tree where it is a West Coast style of offense. It's going to be a run first, pass later kind of a thing. And that's what we saw from this offense when Kyler Murray returned. So sure, they had a breakout from Trey McBride, and Marvin Harrison, of course, is talented, but this offense is going to be predicated around James Conner and Trey Benson. And I didn't even have it on here, but they really addressed this offensive line in the draft as well. Amir, I'm excited. I think the Cardinals can shock a lot of people, and we'll see that in my predictions. But your thoughts about the Cardinals?
I think the Cardinals are going to be one of those teams that kind of, have a lot of upset wins, throughout the season. The Cardinals were kind of in a weird spot where it's like, but they had so many holes on their roster to where it was like, they personally, okay, that's absolutely crazy. Man, Bleacher Report fired this dude for glazing Kyler Murray so bad.
If you guys didn't see at home, I had, of course, the Kyler Murray figure. But continue, Amir. I'm sorry about that.
This team was kind of interesting though because they had all those holes in the roster, and they honestly could have went in basically any direction. And I thought they personally, they had a pretty solid draft, and they go ahead and address, their corner problem. Picking up a Max Melton, who had a monster combine, who's out of Rutgers, and also, grab Sean Murphy, who's solid. And you brought up a great point about them also, kind of revamping this O-line a little bit. And, of course, grabbing their franchise receiver, Marvin Harrison. So, this team honestly is going to be kind of like a sneaky good team. They might win, anywhere between 5 to 7 wins, but be a really good 5 to 7 win team in my eyes.
Yeah, I can see this team being the one team this year that loses the most one possession games. If not them, it'll be Seattle, right? Here in the NFC West. But even with all of this praise and all this hype around Kyler Murray and this team, I don't think it's going to be pretty. Honestly, I think the first half of the season gets off to a rough start. They face a lot of teams that are just going to be better than them. And honestly, this is a perfect season that we're going to find out what kind of a coach is John Gannon, right? But I will say second half of the season, I think they can finish strong. And I think this will be the key for them going into next year because I think they can beat Minnesota, Seattle, New England, Carolina, and even San Francisco if they rest their guys in Week 18. But again, after all of that praise, I think they're 6-11. Your thoughts, Amir?
Yeah, I'm just like you. Starting the year off, I have them, losing their first 7, out of 9 games, and it's going to kind of be like, them kind of, building their young guys up. I mean, because I want to say they probably have the youngest roster in the league, right?
They might. I'd have to fact check.
Yeah. And so, all these guys are kind of learning, building each other up, getting used to themselves, and after that. I have them, kind of turn it up a little bit, winning, some solid games against, some solid teams. I mean, Seattle's solid. I have them actually, beating Seattle twice. And so,
yeah, I see that.
Yeah. And so I have them, also finishing at 6-11 and kind of having some hope, having some promise going into the next year, and some pieces that, they can honestly build with.
Yeah. So again, guys, for everybody at home, if you're still here at this podcast, this is a guy, this is just kind of what happens when you talk every single week about every single team in the NFL. You kind of start to think alike, and it happens more times than not, but we have very similar records for these teams. And next week, of course, we're going to finally get away from these breakdowns, and we're talking about every single NFL team. We're going to be going into some fun episodes from here on out for the next month or so before we start getting into award predictions and power rankings. We're going to have a lot of fun little games for you guys here on the show. So again, if we're getting bored with this series, we're done and we're moving on to the next. But Amir, your last thoughts here about the NFC West and this podcast here, this show today.
It was great. The NFC West is going to be a fun division. I'm excited to see the Rams this year, especially like if I had to watch a team outside of the Browns, I'm kind of interested to see how the Rams are going to be. And me and you both had the Rams, last playoffs, going to the NFC Championship.
Yeah.
And I mean, exactly. And they were literally, honestly, a couple bad calls away from beating Detroit. And personally, I think that next round they go ahead and beat San Fran. And so I'm excited to kind of see this division. I think eventually, this division is going to be like a AFC North type division. San Fran's always going to be good. The Rams are always going to be good with McVay. Seattle has some young pieces to be good in the future. In a couple of years, the Cards might have a new quarterback. So, I think eventually, in a few years, this team's going to be, or this division is going to be a great division. So,
I don't know what you're talking about. I predicted the Niners and Chiefs from day one to go to the Super Bowl, and I predicted it was going to be an overtime finish. But Cooper Kupp revenge season is what I'll leave it off on for the Rams. I'm excited to see what he can do with finally. I think it's going to be a real competition this year. Who's the better receiver on that offense? Is it still Cooper Kupp, or is it now Puka Nacua? Is the chapter turning? We'll have to find out. But episode 190 in the books. We're closing in on that 200. So if you enjoyed, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 20,000.